Yes, so hello everyone. Well, thanks to be here at 6 p.m. for the first day of the ETHMilan convention, which has been a huge success as far as I have seen so far. Today, this is the last panel, and we are talking about DAOs. We're talking about governance and the legal aspects of DAOs, since in this panel, as you can see, we have 3 lawyers. So, you know, the legal aspects could not have been untouched. So here with me, we have Professor Francesco Patti, who is, I will introduce you all guys. Well, if later you want to just have a couple of questions about a couple of words about yourself, you can go on, but I will introduce you. So Professor Francesco Patti, he is the co-founder of the Blockchain Association for Lawyers and a professor at the University of Milan, here at the Bocconi University. Then we have Lisa. She has been the co-founder of TalentDAO and is working towards understanding organizational structures in DAOs. Then Laura, she works at MIDAO and is working as a tech attorney, helping builders and entrepreneurs navigating the legal system. She's also part of the Stanford AI and the Web3 Research Club. Bruce then, Bruce N, is the tech person actually of the panel. He works as the developer of relation, the head of developer relation and adoption lead at Partisia blockchain, and he is the expert on chain voting. So if you have any questions about voting on blockchain and institutional voting, you can ask Bruce, who's the expert here. And last but not least, there's Jawna, who is the head of business development at MIDAO, which is the DAO for the Marshall Islands. She is also part of the ombuds of the Bankless DAO and a founding member of For the Win DAO. So I guess we can get started with the first topic, which is governance. And first of all, just to have a sense on the room, how many of you know what a DAO is by raising your hands? So I guess it's a pretty technical public, so I guess we can skip the first introduction to DAOs. And I would like to ask Lisa, actually, as the first speaker. You have been working in a topic concerning how DAOs work at an organizational level, and specifically about, well, actually leadership in DAOs. So can you tell us about both your work as a researcher and also whether, well, let's just start with your work as a researcher first. So leadership in DAOs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Pietro. Yes, everyone, welcome. We're so excited to be talking about this topic. And one of the things that I've spent the last couple of years doing is researching what does leadership in DAOs really look like. We have these new cutting-edge organizations that we believe are paving the way for the future. But we also know that we have this idea that they're leaderless, that we're going to advance as collectives. And yet what we know is whenever people gather, leadership always emerges. And so that was really the focus of my past 2 years of research, one of which was doing a systematic review, looking at 5,400 different primary studies through meta-analyses and systematic review that looked at hundreds of thousands of people who worked in the space of shared, distributed, and collective leadership models. And what are the behaviors that we can really anchor on that we've learned from the past 25 years that DAOs might find valuable? And to no surprise to many people, it has a lot to do, even as precursors, with this notion of having shared purpose, social support, and then also this idea of your voice mattering and you being able to influence the future which of course comes into a lot of what we'll be talking about when it comes to governance and this legal side of this thing. But most importantly, one of the leaders that I interviewed, Grendel, who's actually a speaker here, he mentioned that this is really a social transformation. And that to me is what I'd like to double down or have you consider during this panel is a lot of what we're talking about. It's a lot of new technology, innovative organizational structures, but a lot of what makes it complicated is the social transformation of all this. And so maybe I'll just leave us there for right now.
Right, thanks. Anyone would like to jump in and share their experience in DAOs, specifically talking about so what Lisa actually told us about also the interviews that you made about leadership. You've been also telling us about the study on how people get on board on DAOs and how do they, get actually very enthusiastic for the first months working in DAOs, and then they encounter all these inefficiencies in DAOs that are not exactly perfect as a new mean of capital and people management at the moment. So I guess you can share something about that as well, and then I guess of all the inefficiencies that you have all explored in DAOs, we can start with that as a main conversation.
Sure, and I can briefly mention, so the first part was looking at the past 25 years. The second part that Pietro is referring to is interviewing 23 different leaders across these amazing DAOs and great efforts within the space, most of which were founders. And one of the things that we found was this prototypical experience with DAOs. So for anyone listening, you might want to think about where you'd fall within this, is you come in, often people describe it as going down the rabbit hole, you become quite obsessed. You realize what a steep learning curve it is, but are extremely energized by the freshness of the perspectives and the people. You realize there are more doors that this opens than does it close. And so you get excited by all these possibilities, but then a moment comes where you start realizing the DAO model or the community or even yourself has some deep limitations in this space. And so you try to reconcile that, and for a lot of people, one of the people I interviewed, they actually left their very prominent DeFi DAO and assumed a different identity and started up at another DAO where they wouldn't have that same baggage and expectation around how to be in the space. So many people dealt with this dip very differently. Some just got flat out burnt out and quit. And so the idea, though, is you practice more selection and you get more clear on what's working for you personally. You get better boundaries as an individual and a better understanding of the legal ramifications and also implications of what this space really has to offer. And that's when you start to find yourself on the upswing out of that valley. And so that's a bit of the prototypical journey, but I'd love to hear some real hand experiences from people.
Yeah, I actually have a question, actually. So I'm really interested in your research, and one of the things that I heard when you mentioned leadership coming out, when the philosophy of DAOs really is more from a bottom-up approach, right? From a central authority where it used to be from a top-down approach, we're now changing it to a bottom-up approach. But when you begin to see leaders emerging and influencing, right? So that really is a little bit more of a top-down approach. So I'm really fascinated at the fact that human nature is really taking shape into what originally was a bottom-up approach, but then now the human nature itself is now influencing how DAOs are now maturing. What are your thoughts about how that two different philosophy potentially may be conflicting with each other, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't necessarily see it as conflicting, the top-down, bottom-up, in the sense that in DAOs, when we refer to leadership, you could look at it as more of a bottom-up, crowdsourced, strategic influence and direction, but it's really about switching the idea from it being a power over dynamic to being a power with dynamic. And the goal is actually for us to start viewing leadership not as a status, a title, or an individual, but to really look at leadership as this emergent and dynamic process where people flexibly lead and influence one another. And so that, to me, is the goal of DAOs, is to understand like who you are, your strengths, what you have to offer, and when you need to step back. And that's an ongoing evolution.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You see leaders emerging, and then they step back, and other leaders kind of come up as well, which is a completely different structure than a top-down, hierarchical approach. So yeah, that makes sense.
I think what we're seeing is what is a DAO become discussed and formulated over time, because there's so many things that are considered a DAO. I mean, I could be part of so many DAOs just because I'm in a Discord right now. Am I really part of that DAO? I hate Discord. I'm not logging on. I'm not engaging on Discord. I'm just not going to. I don't have time for that. But I'm part of these Discords, right? So am I part of this DAO? Am I considered a member when they say we have 2,000 members? Is that because they have 2,000 members of the DAO or because they have 2,000 members of the Discord? How many people are really contributing, and what does that contribution look like? These are all questions we're navigating and we're answering in this space live, right? Because we don't have a definitive answer for what is DAO, because it's not like other than the Marshall Islands, there's not really a great entity that exists for DAO. There's some jurisdictions that are trying to tackle that, but even if we don't have an entity for DAO, we also don't have a great descriptor for DAO, because DAO means so many things right now, because it's such a fluid development of this tech, of how people are using this tech, and how people are engaging in this space as a whole. So I think we're trying to answer that, and in answering that, we're seeing different leadership styles happen, different roles being creative, different styles of engagement, different ways to engage, different ways to fund these purposes or these motivations. And that's all part of what this space is really about.
Thank you. Does anyone else would like to share their experience in DAOs as a part of inefficiencies?
Yes, sure. So I pretty much agree with what was said so far by Lisa. Frankly, inefficiency comes a bit from the attitude of persons, and I think this was also said by Lisa. There was a belief that it is the belief of DAOs where you can jump from one organization to the other, and many people took advantage of this element without being really bound, and this was held as something which is a fantastic future of DAOs. Like, you're free to decide when to commit, how to commit, and if you don't want any more to commit, you jump in the next one and you start from zero. And I think this narrative was kind of wrong, because it cannot work in this way. We are talking about organizations that, if serious, needs to remain and have a group of people that really takes care. And so I saw this pretty much in DAOs. And obviously it was also related to the hype, to the token that was launched, the possibility of earnings. And this was pretty inefficient. And I think that there is room for learning from this experience. Then, as a legal professional, I always compare with the traditional corporations. So looking at the governance of DAOs and the one of traditional corporations. And obviously the main difference is that theoretically DAOs are not hierarchical in nature. Although I pretty much agree that there can be leadership in DAO, which is always also very strong and impositive sometimes, because it comes from the presence. There are people that are always present and available, and this then leads to a certain hidden leadership, which is more into the Discord channel than on-chain governance. What I also saw is the fact that even from people that were not really legal professionals, there was this idea that you should regulate every type of behavior within DAOs with code of conducts, different voting strategies depending on the importance, and regulated discussions plus voting. And I think that we arrived at a point in which the level of complication was even more than a traditional corporation. And this also led to inefficiency, because one thing which is very difficult in DAOs is the decision-making process. It's very difficult to convince people about what is the best. You have different factions that follow different indications. That's the beauty of decentralization, but I really asked to myself if there is a way of making them efficient.
Thank you very much. So talking about governing and voting processes, we have talked about with Jawna as well about the difficulties in voting on chain, so that we need ways to, solve disputes, both on chain and off chain. So would you like to talk to us about off-chain and on-chain resolution?
Yeah, I would. So I'm speaking from a perspective of, so yes, I'm with MIDAO, the Marshall Islands DAO LLC, but I'll share my experience from Bankless DAO. And Francesco, I don't know if what you just said resonated with me, because it reminded me of some of the things that are in Bankless DAO that we face challenges with, that's all very public, right? It's none of this is private. I think the biggest challenge, like what Lisa said at the beginning, is this is a social transformation with how people organize and work. And then it's also a social experiment, right? So getting people to participate and vote and do all of these things, I think a lot of the mechanisms or incentives need to be in place. I don't have all the answers for this. It's just I'm a keen observer for what frustrates people, what causes people to come to me. I'm one of the ombuds, and I think Francesco used to be an ombuds at Bankless DAO. What seem to be the most common complaints or frustrations have to do with like the social aspect, this transforming, and why wasn't I included in this, or why did this person vote no? And in my humble opinion, you shouldn't have to justify if you vote, which brings up the whole question that we talked about outside, Bruce, is about having some privacy in the voting. Again, I don't have all the answers for this, but I've observed a lot of people logging complaints with the Bankless DAO ombuds about people not agreeing with the proposal. And
sorry if I interrupt you, but
please.
One thing that struck me when we talked earlier was the fact that you described these processes as the possibility that the vote is visible on chain,
yeah,
as a beauty contest or Buddhism episodes.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, some of it turns into a popularity contest, and then the person that didn't vote along with the popular vote can become sort of the ugly duckling or the outcast, and then there are ramifications to that. Maybe that person doesn't get included in the next project, and it's not so much that they would tell the person outright, I don't want you on this project. It's sort of like a social isolation where you didn't get the call invite, or they forgot to tell you, or you didn't get the link sent to you. And then we focus so much on the technological aspect of all this, but we forget that you can't automate everything about a human. You can't automate somebody's feelings, somebody's emotion. You can't automate their culture. And so these are the types of things that I would see in my experience, like just at Bankless DAO and some other DAOs, that they seem to be the biggest things that pop up, is the social aspect, like cultural, people's feelings. And I realize this might sound dramatic, but people's feelings matter. Like people's voices being heard matter. It's part of the human condition.
Thank you very much. Bruce, if I can get up to you. You wrote about on-chain voting, right? So can you share with us the paper that actually you wrote about how on-chain voting actually might be, it brings some inefficiencies as well and perplexities when applied not only to DAOs but to society in general, right?
Yeah, so I would love to take credit for that. It's not my paper, actually. It was actually a paper that was written by a couple of researchers in MIT. They talked about why blockchain voting is actually worse than paper voting, or even worse than electronic voting. And the main issue that they had was with the transparency of the votes themselves. And so, like Jawna, you mentioned, bias being introduced into the entire process. So next vote, somebody says, oh, he voted no, or he voted yes, or she voted yes, and now we're going to outcast him. That there's always human biases that go into the picture. And so I want to just first begin by differentiating the difference between anonymity and privacy. There's a huge difference between the two, and I think it's important to distinguish those two. Anonymity does not enable trust, but privacy is what allows human beings, relationships between human beings, to be able to establish trust. So as an example, if I'm anonymous and I say, hey, I want to speak at this wonderful conference, and if I'm anonymous to Giorgio as an example, he'd be like, no, I have no idea who you are, right? There's no trust. He wouldn't invite me in. So I need to have known Giorgio to have that opportunity to come here and speak to you guys. But then if Giorgio says, hey, listen, that's great, I want to invite you in, but now I need to know everything about you. I need to know your past speaking engagements, your history, your employment history, your passport. I need a copy of your passport. Where did you go the last 3 months of the in your travels? I might not be comfortable in exposing all of that information, private information. And so then I won't trust Giorgio, right? Or I won't trust ETHMilan. And so that's the difference between, I think, anonymity and privacy. One actually destroys trust and one enhances trust. And so from a DAO perspective, like you mentioned, unless there's a way for you to be able to privatize, from a DAO perspective, what you actually voted for, you run into these ethical issues. You run into these integrity, voter integrity issues, and exciting to see the ability now for DAOs to incorporate privacy into their applications to enhance the integrity, enhance the ethics of what Lisa, you mentioned, the human condition, right? So that's my feeling on why privacy is so important.
Thank you very much. That was actually a revolution for DAOs because they were born to be as public and transparent as they could, and now we are actually seeing that some problems actually arise from all this transparency. So would you like to, Professor Patti, if would you like to add something about transparency in voting?
I think that in the transparency in voting is an issue because obviously we have these persons that are known, and also the ends domain has also brought more problems because people vote with the ends domain, and so they say who they are, but theoretically you can find out who the persons are. Especially in DAOs that are not so enormous, or where who is the whale and who will vote. And so this, I was also interested in hearing what Jawna was saying. What I like on DAOs, and that's really not legal at all, was the fact that within the social networks you can appear as another person. I have also my own personhood in DAOs, which is hidden and nobody knows, and that's super, it's very beautiful. So on the one side, I agree that there is this transparency. On the other side, what I think made them so prominent was also the fact that you present yourself, nobody knows who you are, you begin to discuss, you show that you have competences for certain areas, and this aspect I think should not change. So my privacy, and obviously if you want to set up a governance system which is really serious, you need to couple privacy plus also securitization of the voting mechanism. You want to be sure that only humans vote on something like this, and I think that the debate is going in this direction. And it's more for granting a proper governance. For instance, NEAR is doing something which I think it's interesting, like this a kind of proof of liveliness, of unicity of the voters. which it's an experiment as every other experiment. It does not really grant privacy in the sense that then if you hold millions of tokens, then people understand who you are. But at least I think on this fact that you cannot circumvent so easily the governance, that's quite interesting. But as regards to the privacy and joining a DAO, I think it's still there. Like you can show up with whatever identity you want to, and obviously if you are a tech person, you can perhaps easily understand from certain elements. But this was one of the things that I liked the most, the fact that you are not yourself, you show up as someone else.
So quick question on that. One of the things that I've always thought about was that when you're anonymous, you're free of consequence. So a really simple example would be that, if you're on Twitter, people are very known for trolling. And one of the reasons why you're able to troll is because there is no consequence to your action. Whereas if I met that person in real life, the person probably would never say the things that they would say in Twitter, as an example. So when you're anonymous, I feel that you're removing that consequence aspect out of it. How does that impact DAOs, you think? And I was really interested in the fact that you said that's part of the beauty of DAOs. So I'm kind of interested in hearing your perspective on that part.
Yeah, I think obviously there is also a dark side in this anonymity. I think that, for instance, in this Discord channel, like you have scammers that come and say, but I don't see this culture that you see on Twitter and destroying people, because there is a very strong control by administration. That every DAO has its code of conduct at the beginning, and there are some admin that immediately intervene and they ban you from. So in reality, it's pretty much control. So what I was arguing is more the fact that you can create a reputation which is separate from your identity outside of the digital world. For instance, in my case, like I don't show up as a professor and then I engage, I don't know, in legal debates with persons that are perhaps younger than me. And this was now not anymore so much, because the DAO hype is over, and we hope that it will come back again. But I was thinking more about this reputational aspect. And then there were also some toolings that were trying to create a reputation for DAO members in trying to attach to the person certain achievements, which were not in the off-chain world. So really something which is attached to the person because of certain things that they've done within the DAOs. This was also a very nice way of approaching, but it was more in this direction. And I think that this problem of coming and not behaving well in the Discord channel, obviously we have cases, and Jawna knows it because she is in an ombuds of a very complex DAO actually, where people fight together. Sometimes they become also very rude. But to be honest, I don't see it as a problem because of this social control, which is very strong within the channels.
I would agree. I don't think anonymity doesn't come without consequence, because if you look at the ICP system, for example, there's known nodes, and those guys are kind of KYC'd. Everyone in the space knows who they are, and then there's anonymous nodes, and you stake with, like, as a user, you can stake to a known node or an anonymous node. And so if those anonymous guys do something that you don't agree with, you are going to unstake with them because you don't agree with the decisions they're making. So anonymous or known, there's more exposure for the known guys, but there's still exposure for the anonymous guys because they're anonymous. And it's not as though there's no exposure, because I can always unstake or unjoin or demote, because even if you're anonymous, you're still traceable in some way. You still have a footprint, and that footprint can be dismissed or removed or blocked in some way. So it's not as though it's without consequence. It's that anonymity might build reputation differently, or might not want to have, they might want to build something without the weight of their persona behind them. They might want to just build it off of technicality and proving themselves versus like a name in the space.
You apply the consequences.
Yeah, it's about how you apply the consequences.
If I may, when talking about voting system, of course, and when the vote affects also the treasury, I mean, I guess that the anonymity is not for sure a deterrent for liability for DAO members, right? Because if a DAO is not provided with a clear legal wrapper, when the voting process comes to an end, the treasury is being moved and the capital is being allocated to different projects. So talking about legal wrappers, maybe I know that MIDAO for sure helps other DAOs to create their own legal wrapper in the Marshall Islands. Would you like to talk us more about that?
Sure. I think LC and Francesco can probably also talk on this, and maybe the other two as well. But so with regards to how that all works, I mean, that has to do with your governance structure and all of that. Just with regards to everybody in this room said they know what a DAO is. So obviously you're all very bright people. How many, if I could ask, how many people a year or two ago asked the DAO before they got involved, what type of legal entity do you have? Right. So my point is, I feel like every day all of us become smarter and smarter about this. And I joke and say, I'm not a lawyer, but I do work for a company that's a registered agent in the Marshall Islands for these legal entities. And I say tongue-in-cheek that I'm a Google lawyer because I'm friends with enough of you, and we have partners that are Web3 lawyers. But I also MIDAO talks with anywhere from like 20 to 50 DAOs a week, and we get to meet their lawyers, and we get to hear all kinds of really complex and interesting questions. And my whole point in telling you that is, you know, a year ago, nobody asked, hey, what is the legal entity before I get involved with this? Now, even myself included, I was going to run for a multi-sig election in another project, and I didn't because there was no legal entity, and I thought, what could happen? Like, what could happen here and a negative consequence? So what does the Marshall Islands do? There are legal entities all around the world that address these, and LC and Francesco can talk about these, but just in summary, the Marshall Islands today anyways is one of the prominent sovereign nations that actually has legislation that was enacted of the DAO Act of 2022 last year. So there's a comprehensive legislation to cover the functions within a DAO, including protecting all the members with limited liability. So I think that's a big differentiator, and I don't know if LC and Francesco want to comment on this at all.
Yes, sure. So I have to say something beautiful about Marshall Islands DAO, obviously. I start from the problem that everyone knows, the fact that if you don't have a legal wrapper, there is the idea that the DAO is a general partnership. It was said, I remember back in 2020 when the DAO hype started, but now we have case law of the United States of America that clearly states that without a wrapper, you apply the law of the general partnerships, and it means that all the members are jointly and severally liable. And if the activity of the DAO is a dangerous one that might also entail liability, then it might be also dangerous for the members of the DAO. And so there was a great debate about how to solve the issues. There are several different opportunities given by legislations, and some of them are kind of readaptation of existing entities. For instance, the foundations of Cayman, Panama, Switzerland, they're used more as a kind of Web3 arm of the DAO. The DAO does things off-chain with the foundation, but these entities do not cover the liability of the members because it's not a company, and so it's not a corporation. You don't have shares. Whereas the Marshall Islands DAO law is a kind of derivation of the LLC law, modified, and accepts the fact that every token holder is considered a member of the LLC, and in this way he has a limited liability, which is very nice, frankly, because it reduces the exposure to liability. It protects the members. Only the LLC will be liable, at least for civil law liability, then civil liability. For criminal liability, not necessarily, but hopefully this does not apply. And so Marshall Islands, a very tiny atolls in the middle of the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. They really invented something which is new and that has also some particular features compared to other DAO laws, as for instance Wyoming, because of this flexibility and then the ability to shape the LLC contract in a way which is really innovative and aligned with the governance of the company. Said this, obviously, given that it is company law and you're setting up a company in the Marshall Islands, it's a tax paradise, and so one has to be also aware about what you're doing. If, for instance, you are located in a country in which taxes are applied at a company level. So, I mean, not everything is suitable for every group of people that want to set up a DAO, but I think it's not so much the Marshall Islands DAO law in itself, but it's more the experiment, which is interesting in legal terms. Finally, I wanted to say something about the DAO more in general. Because of this fear of partnership, all the narrative has brought to consider legal entities as the main paradigm for DAOs. And actually, the most innovative positions in the US are also looking to more contractual agreements between members to the model of the joint venture. So escaping a bit the idea that you have to set up an organization in terms of an entity, but more as a bundle of contracting parties that regulate their behaviors in a way which does not entail the application of fiduciary duties. I don't know where this will bring, but it's also an interesting point because you could theoretically build up several entities depending on the activities of the DAO and then bundle all together with a contractual network or a type of joint venture, which I think could also be interesting. So legal experiments are on the rise in this matter, and I think that the legal research should follow a bit the innovation that DAOs are trying to do from a technological point of view, not obstacle the innovation. And I think that the flexibility of the Marshall Island law is very interesting in this regard.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you did a great job of covering the top to bottom of what the Marshall Islands has to offer, and also what's problematic about DAOs without a legal entity. If you don't have a legal wrapper, people like to gloss over, okay, well, I'm a general partnership, and that's joint and several liability, and those sound scary, but the reality is it's not just the Treasury that you could lose, right? Like, it cuts both ways. So joint and several liability, there's a situation in which you're responsible for that Treasury. You might be responsible for the whole of the Treasury tax-wise. So if your Treasury has, $1 million in it and you're in a jurisdiction that does your percentage, you might be liable for those taxes on your percentage of that huge Treasury, even if you don't really have access to it, because it's a joint partnership. Conversely, if you declare bankruptcy, that Treasury might be available to your debtors. So now, as a group, your Treasury, which you think is safe, you have one bad actor in your DAO, and that corporation that has nothing to do with your DAO just finds out that you're a member of the DAO and you're in a bankruptcy action. That Treasury might be available to that action of bankruptcy. And the other DAO members can't really stop it because it's a partnership, it's joint and several liability. So it really cuts both ways. You're exposing the whole of the Treasury to yourself, and also the Treasury as a whole is exposed by you. So you have to be trusting of your partners if you're in a general partnership. And while those are extreme examples, it just should get you thinking, what are you actually doing in a partner in this DAO? What's the point of this DAO? Why am I giving money to this DAO? Why do I want to expose myself? You really need to just be thoughtful as you're entering this space, because you can get yourself into trouble with innocuous decisions. We were discussing whether or not it's a DAO as a Discord. Well, Discord allows you to token gate, right? So if I buy an NFT, thinking I'm just buying an NFT, but this NFT promises me access to this DAO because of Discord. Now I've token gated my Discord. That's another layer of insulation. That's a really hard argument towards general partnership. Now you've got this joint venture and an exclusionary factor to get into that. And so the courts are going to look at that as a way to say, no, you've really actively availed yourself of this group, and this group is jointly doing this with a shared fund. It's really the shared fund that gets the jurisdiction's attention, whether you're in the US or outside the US. Every jurisdiction is going to care about money. They care about money and its movements. So the moment you have a shared wallet, whatever jurisdiction you're in is going to be a little bit more interested in whatever you're doing. So you have to be thoughtful as you're entering this space, especially if there's money moving.
I think, too, that's one of those things that can seem really overwhelming when you enter the space is what exactly am I entering into? And also for the people creating and building in the space, it's not always clear either on how to make those discernments about what you want to set up. And so even through a lot of the leaders that we spoke with, one of the things that became clear is that when you're setting up a DAO, there's some really big decisions to make that have a lot of legal implications to them, like how decentralized you are versus centralized. And a lot of DAOs, they have the promise of decentralization, but almost all of them start very, very centralized with a small group of people and then work their way toward progressive decentralization. There's also this notion of privacy or transparency. I love using the example of MoonDAO. They basically have this DAO that has completely transparent channels all the way across to avoid having that sort of conversation outside of the community where people can't see what the core group is really deciding on behalf of the DAO. And what they do is they make all the channels read-only for certain conversations, but at least you have access to see what's being said, and then other ones that the community can partake in. And so they go more toward like a radical transparency of all the communication that happens within the DAO is accessible to anyone at any point, versus many DAOs will still have like that Telegram thread that people didn't know existed until they got deeper into the DAO. And so I think there's a lot of decisions to make early on. And then, of course, one of them is on how open you are or whether you have that gated access. And a lot of DAOs take different approaches to that too, whether they want to fully be open access to people or where part of their intrigue is that they're gated and they're more of an exclusive community in that way. And so I think some of these basic principles are what many people describe as being the total overwhelm of entering into the space, not just as a participant, but also as somebody setting things up and trying to take on those decisions as true foundational settings for a DAO. But what's become really clear is that over time, it's been a slow down and do more due diligence. Because you can't put stuff on chain and then change it later in a really easy way. And many people have had to learn that the hard way. So it really is this evolution in the DAO space of starting to go a little bit slower to do the right thing. I feel like Jawna wants to jump in here.
Okay, I'm just going to comment from having spoken to lots of DAOs. I know all of you have, but what I see the most common, I think, a mistake happening today is that there's this copy-paste, let's just do it quickly, let's bypass talking to the lawyers, and let's just do what MakerDAO is doing. And I love talking about MakerDAO because I do think they're a great example, but like they announced at ETH Prague this summer that they're going to move to the Series DAO LLC, for example, model, which is wonderful and it fits their use case, but it doesn't fit everyone's use case. And so all I would say is I'm not going to tell you which legal entity to do. I'm not up here to just, shill the Marshall Islands, although I do think it has the best legislative coverage to date, and the lawyers will tell you. But keep in mind also, and Elsie and Francesco, comment on this, please. Lawyers recommend what they feel most comfortable and what they feel is safest, right? Because it's your reputation, and also you have to do right by your client. And so I talk to lots of DAO projects that say, well, so-and-so told me to do a Cayman Foundation. And if that's what their lawyer told them to do based on what they were trying to achieve, I think you should listen to your lawyer. But if you are looking for a comprehensive solution, like what you were saying earlier, Francesco, maybe you could have many different legal entities to serve the different functions of a DAO, and maybe you stitch them together, or you legally engineer that in such a way that you have partnership agreements between them, or venture agreements, or whatever it's going to be. That really needs to be considered thoughtfully, right? And what I see a lot happening now is a lot of people are becoming Google lawyers and just saying, I just saw what MakerDAO did, I'm going to do exactly what they did. It might match your use case, but I would say you should probably check and talk with good people like the panel up here and get other opinions. I think that's really important.
On that note, I would say, just because someone's doing something today does not mean they're not going to get tapped by a jurisdiction, you know, or in trouble with a jurisdiction for that 5 years from now. Because while government is slow, it's inevitable. And jurisdictions care about what's going on. They're all paying attention. You know, the MiCA legislation is active now, and it took how long to get it passed and how long to get it to where it is now, which is also not satisfactory. It's not stopping. Government is just really slow. So what's going on today isn't necessarily okay today. It just is what's going on today. And the illegal stuff that's happening is going after stuff from 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and it's being settled or discussed today. So you're getting this like delayed reaction, and what we have to remember about this space is it is about transparency, and the blockchain is immutable. That's a record. That's a transparent record that's immutably documented on chain. So keep that in mind, and understand that there's implications to everything that you're doing today. As the law evolves and as the government gets more savvy and hires more people to engage in this new medium, there will be ramifications. So what works for MakerDAO might not work for you because you don't know the ins and outs of what they're doing, how they're deciding, and what factors are going into their decision. I will say I love MakerDAO because they're very transparent about where they spend their money. And if you want to know how or why they arrived at their decision, look at their legal. They spent a significant portion on their legal to get to that decision, to make that decision for a series LLC. And that legal bill they pay is going to continue going, because in this space, as you develop, legal is something you have to continually touch base on. It's not, okay, well, we decided today and we're good and we don't need to talk to these lawyers again. As the law evolves and as this space evolves, this is something you've got to check in on, because things might change. A court decision could come down in any jurisdiction that'll have ramifications, especially if your members are global. You're not just worried about one jurisdiction, you're worried about every jurisdiction that could touch your members. So you have to have an understanding of what's going on in the space, and then continued conversation about legal.
I'd just like to zoom out from that too and say this is a bigger need across the space to value high quality maintenance and quality in the long-term view a lot more. Even this past summer, I was part of a project with Token Engineering Commons where we interviewed 41 token engineers. And one of their biggest sentiments of their gripes in the space right now is how much copying and pasting is going on, because people want to ship yesterday. And that sort of, whether it's VC funding pressure or just internal pressure, it doesn't always produce the best decisions. It often doesn't. And so I think it's also this notion that, hey, if you really want to create an organization, if the O in DAO really is something, it requires ongoing effort as well as that upfront intentionality. And so I just encourage people to look into these things further, to keep experimenting, and to understand that like just hiring a lawyer one time, or hiring one person to do token engineering, which is a very complex end-to-end process, we might need to be putting more effort into some of this upfront stuff to, again, go slow, to go fast, and consider that social side of all this.
Thank you for that. So to wrap up the panel, right, I would like to ask you, all of you, among all of the different problems that we have seen today, If you had to choose one, the most pressing issues, the issue that DAOs need to solve right now in order to become more efficient or more transparent, for example, what would you choose?
Okay, I'll start. So I was not prepared for this question, but no, I would not say legal, frankly, because I see legal, obviously it entails a lot of legal risks, and you mentioned also this aspect of the treasury, it is very important, but don't see legal as the main problem of DAOs. Today, I think more research should be done on the governance side, and also remember that the automation aspect in DAO is very important. And depending on the type of DAO, obviously, but I think that like DAOs became a bit too much discussions on Discord and on the forums, and this on-chain and technology-driven decision-making was a bit behind, falling aside, which to me is not fantastic, because in the end we are basically recreating what is already existent off-chain, and so we have even more inefficiencies because of how DAOs are set up.
I would say that for me, it comes down to user experience. Fed into that is maybe funding, pay people for doing high quality work, as well as education, give people education to do the work well. And when it comes to this notion of leadership, it barrels down to advancing the work of the DAO. And to me, that's really what it comes down to, is the user experience. Make it easy for people to advance the work of the DAO.
I would just say building thoughtfully. Like, people are building such creative and innovative solutions to problems that are Web 2 legacy problems and Web 3 problems that we've seen so far. But people are building quicker than they're taking time to think about the security exposure, the legal exposure, the tech. So I would say just building thoughtfully, thinking about who you're partnering with in this space, kind of always checking in on what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're trying to solve, instead of just rushing into the next hyped word or exciting thing that you see trending on Twitter. Just really thinking and trying to solve for something thoughtfully.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's not being reactive and not being, and always understanding the nuances of your particular situation. So as an example, like we were talking about anonymity. I had a particular opinion, you had a particular opinion, and understanding those two nuances and the nuances of your particular DAO, I think, is the most important thing. Understanding the human element and all of these different topics that we've discussed, and putting that into a real thoughtful process is going to ultimately, in the end, make it more efficient, specific to your DAOs.
So I would just say, think about those things and be mindful of that.
Well, thank you everyone, actually, to having stayed with us here until 7 p.m. This first day of the ETHMilan convention, and we can just go and get drinks now, I guess.